All right, so we had a great discussion on taxes. You all know how I feel about taxes. So now let's talk about international trade. I had mentioned just now recently about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And I talked about tariffs. Tariffs being a tax on international trade. Now, with NAFTA, it's an agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. For those of you who don't know this, Canada and Mexico are the United States' largest trading partners, way bigger than China. Way bigger than China. Some people don't know that. They think, oh, China's got to be the biggest. No, it's not. It's Mexico and Canada. In fact, we get the majority of our products from Mexico and a good amount from Canada. The borders are very, very busy. There's a lot of container ship ports at both borders. There is a lot of points of entry that the trucks have, right? The container trucks. And so that's where the majority of our products come from. People think, oh, it mostly comes from China. It's not actually true. Majority of our products come from Mexico and Canada. They might have originated in China, but come through Mexico and Canada. So international trade. I would say the majority of the world benefits from international trade because it creates consumer and producer surpluses. Absolutely. With respect to the equilibrium, domestic buyers and sellers benefit without trade. Meaning General Motors of the world, the New Balance, Under Armour, other companies that manufacture here in the United States and sell their products in the United States, they benefit the most without trade because less competition, right? But you introduce that new competition, it changes the equilibrium. As you know, equilibrium is the balance between supply and demand. It's the point where the two intersect. The same with price. Price intersects with equilibrium, supply and demand, and equilibrium of quantity, right? The balance. This point is determined on the domestic market. Domestic market means local, just in the United States. Okay, domestic. The equilibrium is balanced based off of domestic, so buyers and sellers. Benefits both the consumers and the producers. So without international trade, we can see consumers and producers surpluses are pretty large overall because it's domestic. There's no competition from the outside. We can see the point of equilibrium for the price and the quantity are met at the point of domestic supply and domestic demand. This example just happens to be with textiles, which is, like cloth. But it could also be for things like vehicles that are produced by General Motors and produced in the United States, sold in the United States. Or it could be from New Balance or Under Armour that are producing their products and selling them in the United States. So this would be representative of those types of companies that produce and sell locally. So it's important to see this because I'm going to show you what it looks like when we introduce trade. Benefits from trade, everyone. Mostly everyone. The only people that don't benefit from international trade are the domestic producers, like farmers. benefit from international trade. Farmers don't because the majority of the crops produced in the United States are consumed in the United States. How do we allow for international trade? What are the effects of this? Prices and the quantities sold in domestic marketplaces are impacted by international trade. Oftentimes, you'll find that goods and services produced locally in the US are more expensive than goods and services produced outside of the United States and sold here. There's a lot of reasons for that. Cost of manufacturing is less in other countries. Cost of labor is way less in other countries. Those things combined with small tariff makes it that goods and services produced in other countries are priced at a lower price point. They're sold domestically. So who gains from the trade? Who loses? People that gain is almost everyone. There are a couple of people that don't gain from trade. Those are people that produce domestically. They don't gain from trade. Sometimes it makes it more difficult for them to sell because competing with goods and services at lower price points. It's difficult to do that. About tariffs. When a tariff is introduced, it's a form of a tax on trade. Tariffs can be good and they can be bad. How can a tariff be good, you might ask? It's a tax. Dr. B, why would a tax be good? You just told us in the last chapter taxes ain't great. Taxes have some benefit. A tariff is a form of an international tax. A product is produced internationally and sold domestically. What a tariff does, it puts a tax on those goods coming into the country. Why is that good, you might ask? Because it limits the amount of goods coming in. And it provides an opportunity for those companies producing those same goods domestically to compete. That's why a tariff would be good. In some cases, not always. A couple of prices you need to know. What we call the world price, also known as the international price. And there's the domestic price. A world price is the price of a good that prevails in the world marketplace for that good. An example of this would be a Toyota vehicle in Japan. Sold everywhere, even here in the US. They have what we call a world price, a world market. Okay, same price no matter what country you go to. Just the difference is going to be the currency that's being sold in, but it's the same price. The other price you need to know about is called the domestic price. This is a price that would be paid if the good were produced and sold in the domestic market, the local price. If it's just produced and sold here. An example of this would be Under Armour products. Produced in Baltimore, sold in the United States. So it's important to compare the prices. The reason why we compare them is to figure out who has a comparative advantage. Remember that term. We talked about comparative advantage, I think a couple of weeks ago when we first talked about international trade. And when we talked about it, It's when one country has the advantage over another when it comes to producing that good. A price advantage. So if domestic price is less than the global or international price, good is exported, and the country has a comparative advantage. If the domestic price is greater than the international price, would import the goods. The world has a comparative advantage. The international country has a comparative advantage. Where it's being made. Yeah. Who wins and who loses? That's what everyone likes to know with trade. Because there can only be a winner and a loser. That's how trade works. Okay, everyone wins. So, the exporting country oftentimes wins. Why? Because they're selling their goods everywhere. Domestic equilibrium price before trade is below the world price. Once trade is allowed, domestic prices increase in order to equal the world price. For example, China sells small electronics in the United States to be sold in the United States. Distributors, yeah. In that, let's say it costs $10 for one good that China sells to the United States. That's the sales price. What that does is it makes that good competitive on a global scale. Meaning, that because it's able to be sold for $10 outside of China, China will likely increase the price of that good to $10 to equal the world price. It's not necessarily good for the Chinese people because the domestic price increased. It's good for the world, you see. The domestic quantity supplied is going to be greater than the domestic quantity demanded. Absolutely. The difference, of course, is what's being exported. The more that the country is able to produce in excess being surplus, the more the country is able to produce in surplus, the more export. Makes sense. I got a lot of this product. There's only so much demand locally. The rest of it, I'm going to export. Yeah, absolutely. That's the way it works. So for that country that's exporting, this is what it looks like. So we have price before trade, which is where domestic supply and demand are at equilibrium. And then with the price after trade, we see the price went up. We see that the domestic supply is equilibrium to the world price. And the domestic demand is equilibrium to the world price. Those 2 points combined represent the total exports. So area D represents the total exports. It's a result of total surplus, right, based off of the gain from trade. So remember, the more that the country is producing, past the point of domestic supply and demand, the amount could be exported. Before international trade is introduced, there's a consumer and producer surplus. Within the international trade, when it's produced, when the international trade is allowed, there's a small consumer surplus, a higher producer surplus, which results in a higher total surplus, and that amount is exported. In other words, an easy way to put this is the amount that's exported is the difference between the consumer and producer surplus beyond the domestic consumption. Domestic producers of the goods and services are better off because the domestic consumers are worse off, unfortunately. And the reason why this is because, as I mentioned earlier, the producers increase the price in order to match the world price. When that happens, the local consumers, domestic consumers, have to pay a higher price, making them worse off. Trade arises from the economic well-being of the nation, and so the nation gains as a whole, but the domestic consumers do not. And the wins and losses. The importing country, the country taking in the products from another country's production, the equilibrium price before the trade is above the world price. Once trade is allowed, of course, that point of equilibrium is going to drop to the world price. This is good for the local consumer, the domestic consumer. It's not so great for the local producer. Okay, so we'll talk about this. So we can see for the importing country, the price before trade is high. Once we introduce trade, it goes down. Reason for that is because now there's more products competing with the domestic products, right, from the importing country. So it lowers the price on the market. Once that happens, it's great for the domestic consumers, the customers, but it's not good for the producers because the domestic producers now have to compete with that customer, you see. So the gain from this trade is represented at point D, anything above the world price and below the price it was before trade. That's where the benefit lies. For the importing country, for the international trade, there's a consumer surplus and a producer surplus. When we introduce the international trade, higher consumer surplus because the consumer has more power to buy now because the price went down. But there's a smaller producer surplus because the domestic producers are not going to produce more when there's import. It results in a total higher surplus. Who wins, who loses? Domestic producers, not good. Because again, they have to compete with the international imports. The domestic consumers are better because they're paying a lower price. So is it good for the nation? Yeah, it's good for the nation overall, but not the best for the local producers. But overall, everyone's better off from trade. That's the point I'm trying to get across. What happens when there's a tariff? A tariff, as I mentioned earlier, is a tax on goods produced abroad and sold domestically. That's your word for it. It's a tax. Yeah, it's a tax. It's an import tax. And sometimes an export tax, depending on what the situation is. For free trade is when the domestic price equals the world price. Free trade is hard to achieve at some levels, especially for domestic producers. There's a tariff on imports. It means that we're taxing goods that are coming into the country. This is good for the domestic producer because it limits the amount of goods coming into the country. It all helps to offset pricing. But doing this, of course, the overall price is higher. Areas D and F in this graph represent the total surplus, the deadweight loss from the tariff. Yeah, just like the chapter on taxes that we just talked about, same principle applies here. Tariff is a tax. It gets treated the same way. There's also a deadweight loss involved. The effects of the tariff, overall price goes up because the tariff really gets passed along to the consumer, right? Domestic quantity of demand decreases, higher price, less people want to buy it. Quantity of supply increases, offset, right? Supply and demand. Reduction of the quantity of imports. Think of tariff as a deterrent. There's going to be less people buying it. There's a move of domestic market closer to equilibrium without the trade. When there's a tariff, the domestic producer benefits. Domestic sellers are better off. Domestic buyers are a little worse off because of the higher cost that they're paying because of the tariff. So those are the overall effects of a tariff. Before a tariff tax is introduced, consumers, of course, benefit. The producers also benefit. But that means the tax revenue that the government collects is zero from the tariff, right? The tariff is introduced, surplus of the consumer goes down, producer surplus goes up, government gets tax revenue, but the overall total surplus is a little smaller. That's tariffs. What are other benefits about international trade? Why is international trade a good thing? You get more goods and services from around the world. So a variety of goods. It's good. Lower cost, economies of scale, increased competition. Some can argue that one's not as great. Not good for the domestic producers. An enhanced flow of ideas. Now, from international trade, that also means an exchange of ideas and from patents and things like that. There's a technological transfer that sometimes occurs, reverse engineering, that kind of thing. These are all benefits. For the domestic producers, of course, they're not really liking the whole idea of trade because, they have to compete, the price is higher, and there's a belief that the domestic producers be protected to some degree by tariffs and quotas. There's always the job argument as well. It's like, we're importing a lot of stuff. That means less jobs for people producing locally. To some degree, that's true. But also, it leads to more competition, so it might actually create jobs. The other fun argument is national security. Those goods made in China. National security issue. Is it though? Depends. Depends on what it is. It's the telecom thing. Yeah, I guess you could argue that part. The other stuff, kind of doubt that. That's another argument that's always made. And then one of the other arguments is, what about brand new industries? My favorite one here is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, as you know, is a very new, exciting industry. It's being used in a lot of different ways and it's being integrated in a lot of different pieces of machinery. It's a new industry for us in the United States, artificial intelligence. So there's a need to protect that intellectual property that was made by the advent of artificial intelligence. And so government is working on policies to protect this new industry. So that's the idea of the infant industry argument. We don't want other countries replicating what we're doing here. We want to be good at something, as they say. But sometimes this creates an unfair competition, right? One country's great at another thing, it's not necessarily great. But sometimes the protections are also used as what we call a bargaining chip. Like, okay, so the United States has a lot of great artificial intelligence. We might be willing to share this new technology with some of our trading partners in order to create some type of benefit. The bargaining chip. Again, who benefits from trade? Everyone, pretty much, except for sometimes the local producers. And there's good and bad with it. And that's the same with a lot of things in economics. So, any questions at all about international trade? Use some relevant stuff, right? Like artificial intelligence here. To kind of put things into context. Questions, comments, concerns? I did so well today. I'm kind of surprised. Quiet. I mean, I know it's Monday night, so there's that part. Hopefully you got something out of this. We do okay? Did I do okay? Any questions?
Yeah, so far so good.
So far so good. Okay, I like that. That's very nice of you. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's quickly recap the okay, that's me. Sorry about that. It's just a fire alarm, it's fine. Let's quickly recap what's going on here in the classroom. So we are in week 6. We just talked about taxes and we talked about international trade. So what do you have to do by Sunday night? You might be wondering. So click on Engage and Explore and hypothesis. Yay, another one. I know you're so excited about them. Oh, which I gotta fix. No problem. I'll fix that right away. This is a crowding out video. It's a good one. I think you'll like it. So just as before, post one annotation and respond to another. And then there's going to be a quiz. I know you're surprised about that. The quiz covers both chapters 8 and chapter 9. Okay. As always, 2 attempts, all that good stuff. So those are the 2 things that you need to complete by Sunday night. Any questions on that? Or good? Really? Okay. Well, that makes me feel good. Questions? Okay. Well, with that, if you think of something, if you need anything, if you're like, oh, Dr. B, I didn't quite understand this part that you talked about, or if you're like, oh, Dr. B, I don't understand this question on the quiz, you can email me, call me, set up office hours, whatever. I'll be happy to take care of you. Know that. So Hopefully I'm doing the right things for you. I think I am. I just want, my job is to make sure that you're all good and you're learning. So, sorry it's not as entertaining as you might think it is, but okay. Well, with that, thank you all so much for
I
your
do have
time.
a question.
Yeah,
Sorry to cut you
support,
off.
please.
It's not about what we learned today. I know at the beginning of class you said we're almost at the midway point, and I was
Almost.
wondering if we were going to have a study guide or what's the best way to start studying for the midterm.
Oh, you're going to have not only will you have a study guide, I am your study guide. So what's going to
Okay.
happen here, Sapora, and I'm so glad you asked that question. That's a wonderful question. So the midterm exam is sitting here in week 8, right? So it's midterm week roughly. It's a little bit before that. So around the middle of October. So you got some time. So the way that's going to work, Sapora, I'm so glad you asked that question. So when we get to week 8, so we got some time. We got about a week and a half before we get there. When we do get there, the way that's going to work is we'll have our class like we normally do on Monday. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to host a special midterm exam review. Okay. And so in that midterm exam review, we'll talk about the questions, talk about where to find solutions to the questions, what chapter is this in, what chapter is that. We'll walk through the exam. I'm sure you're comfortable with it. And then you can take the exam. Yeah. So I'll give you a complete walkthrough. And I'll record the video just like I normally do. So don't be concerned about that. Does it sound good to you, Sapora?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. You're very welcome. Great question. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Hey, awesome. Thank you all so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for doing the hard work and getting things done. If you need anything in the meanwhile, email me, call me, set up office hours. I got you 100% of the time. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.